The first helicopter. Mum's clothesline goes round and round. I had one of those, said Granny. A rotary clothesline. What happened to it? Like everything your grandfather builds, it went wrong. Give that prop a bit of a push, Jack, or we'll have the towels dragging on the ground. Such a blessing, dear, having somebody to help me hang out the washing. What happened to your rotary clothesline, Granny? I'll just get this sheet over the line. Now the pegs. Thank you. Years ago, I had a clothesline like this, from one side of the back lawn to the other, with a tea tree prop in the middle. Then, Mrs. Bragg down the road got a rotary clothesline. Couldn't go to Bryce's store without being told how quickly it dried her clothes, how little space it took up, and how everybody should get one. Next thing, Mrs. Boast had a rotary clothesline. Then Mrs. Vaunt, and then the three of them were in the shop every morning, squawking like chooks that have just laid an egg. Were their clotheslines better? Well, that's what they reckoned, but your grandfather said, it's just new-fangled fashion. Build me a rotary clothesline at once, I told him. I'm not going to be the last with an old-fashioned line. Why not? He wanted to know, the cheek of him. So we got nothing to eat that night, nothing next morning, nothing for lunch. That brought him up with a round turn, I can tell you. Granny grabbed a couple of pegs to hold a shirt. That afternoon, he put in a post for my rotary clothesline. By the time it was dark, he'd nearly finished building the four arms and stringing the wire between them. Did you give him anything to eat that night? A roast dinner. He ate so much he went straight to sleep. Oh, he must have been hungry. He was up first thing next morning, finished my rotary clothesline in time for breakfast. Porridge, bacon and eggs with sausages, fried bread, black pudding, tomatoes and toast and marmalade. Gee, Granny smiled. I hung out my washing early and went down to the shop. Told everyone I had a rotary clothesline. And that wiped the smug look off their faces. Mrs. Bragg went home in such a hurry she left her bread and paper on the counter of Mr. Bryce's store, and Mrs. Boast and Mrs. Vaunt ran after her with them to escape me. So everything was all right? You'd think so, wouldn't you? I got home, and do you know what they were up to? Mrs. Boast and Mrs. Vaunt? Not them, silly. Your grandfather and that friend of his, that Mr. Humdrum with the squeaky voice. What had they done? They'd rigged up my rotary clothesline with the engine off a motor mower they'd found in the dump. It was spluttering and coughing, driving my new rotary clothesline round and around. Your washing's going to get drier quicker than anyone else's, said Grandfather. And that Humdrum just nodded and grinned. Work's a treat. He had the cheek to squeak at me. I'll give the pair of you a treat, I told them. Look at the grease and oil all over my sheets. That moment the engine raced, and the rotary clothesline spun faster and faster, and took off straight up into the air. I grabbed a sheet, and the next thing I knew, I was looking at the street growing smaller and smaller below me, praying the pegs wouldn't pull out. What did Grandad do? Just pointed and yelled, Ha ha ha, I can see up your skirt. He and that nitwitted friend of his, they just stood down on the lawn laughing. Hang on, they shouted. Did you fall? The engine ran out of petrol. The rotary clothesline spun the other way and came straight back down on the back lawn again. But all the gossipy neighbours had seen me, dangling from a sheet with grease and oil all over it. I stood over those two men while they soaped and rubbed the sheets on the scrubbing board till their fingertips were raw. Then I made them light the copper, boil the sheets and blue them. And then I made them put my old clothesline again, peg out the sheets. Next morning I waited till late afternoon. There was nobody about before I went near the shop. That Mrs. Vaunt and Mrs. Boast and Mrs. Bragg were all out pretending to look in their letterboxes. So I came home round the other way with the bread and the paper. There was your grandfather sitting on one of my good kitchen chairs, tied to the middle of the rotary clothesline. He pulled a cord, the engine roared, the arms flew round and round and it went mad. It took off and chased that Mr. Humdrum across the back lawn. It cut my dahlias flat, chopped the tops of your grandfather's potatoes and crashed into his bean row. Those two men talked big about having invented a new sort of flying machine, one that could take straight off up into the air and come straight down again to land. They might have invented the helicopter, Granny. As if I cared. I got my chair out of the wreck, made them take the whole thing, engine and all, to the tip. I had my good name to look after. Looking up my skirt indeed. Granny pegged out an old pair of Grandad's trousers and gave them such a whack across the seat with a stick. I knew not to ask anything more about her rotary clothesline.